The Highest Hill, written by Lise Honeyman. Ted was usually very active and athletic, but for a while he hadn't been able to play any sports because he'd broken his arm. At last, the day he'd been waiting for came. Ted was at the doctor's office to have the plaster cast removed from his arm. For months he had been unable to straighten his arm or scratch it when it itched. He'd also had to keep it dry, which meant no swimming. Your arm is completely healed. You can go back to doing everything you did with it before the accident, said the doctor. She took the cast off and threw it into the trash can. Ted stared at his arm. The truth was that he wasn't very happy to have the cast removed, but he smiled at the doctor and thanked her before he went to find his mother in the waiting room. Well, this is wonderful, his mother said. You can start racing again. I know how miserable you've been because you couldn't join in the fun. Ted didn't answer. He wasn't sure he wanted to race again, because that was how he'd broken his arm in the first place. Before the accident, he'd been the best go-kart racer in the village. Even the older boys hadn't been able to beat him. Now all he could think about was how much it had hurt when his go-kart had crashed halfway down the hill. Ted had fallen out and landed on his arm, breaking it badly in 3 places. His arm had been in a plaster cast ever since, and he hadn't been able to do more than watch as the other boys and girls from the village raced their go-karts every weekend. Ted had been go-karting for as long as he could remember. It was the kids' favorite sport in his village, and the adults could all remember go-karting when they were young. Everyone came to watch the races on Saturday mornings. Before the accident, it was Ted's favorite day of the week. Now he wasn't sure he could do it anymore. When Ted and his mother arrived home, they found the rest of the family waiting for them. "Oh, you got your cast off," said his father. "That's great news. You'll be back in the races before you know it." "Well," said Ted, "my go-kart was damaged in the accident. I don't think it will work again." "Don't worry, we can fix it," said Ted's grandpa. "You can't be without a go-kart. You're the village champion. If we can't fix it, we can always get you a new go-kart," Ted's mom said. "It can be an early birthday present." Ted tried to smile. His family were trying to be nice. They didn't realize that he was scared. He couldn't tell them. They wouldn't understand. "A new go-kart wouldn't be the same," he said, and then he went and shut himself in his bedroom. The next day, Ted's father knocked on his bedroom door. "I've brought your go-kart out of the garage. Come on out and we'll see if it can be saved," he said cheerfully. Ted didn't want to look at his go-kart, but he couldn't tell his father that, so he went outside to join him. His grandpa was looking at what was left of Ted's beautiful old go-kart. "I think we can save some of the parts," he said to Ted with a smile, "but this cart won't race again." "I'm sorry, Ted." Ted felt very relieved. "That's okay, Grandpa," he said. "We'll get you a new go-kart," his father said. "I don't want a new go-kart," said Ted. "It wouldn't be the same." "Of course not," said his father, "but you could grow to love it as much as you loved the old one." "No, I couldn't," Ted said. Before his father could reply, Ted's grandpa interrupted. "I have an idea, Ted. Why don't you and I build a go-kart together? We could use some of the parts of your old go-kart so you would feel you were still using it, but we could add some new parts and make it really special. How about it?" He saw that Ted was about to refuse and quickly added, "Of course, it would mean that you couldn't race for a while. It's going to take time to build a really special go-kart." He smiled gently. Ted thought hard. He enjoyed spending time with his grandpa, and it was the perfect excuse not to race. Nobody would pressure him about it because they would think he was waiting until he'd build the perfect kart. He smiled back at his grandpa. That sounds great, Grandpa. Thanks. Every weekend for the next few months, Ted joined his grandpa in the garage. They took his old go-kart apart and threw most of it away. Then they chose wood for the new go-kart and spent hours working on a totally new design. By the time it was finished, it wouldn't look anything like Ted's old go-kart. It would look very new and fancy, and Ted felt excited when he looked at the drawings, but he was still afraid. Ted and his grandpa painted the go-kart bright red. It was the most beautiful go-kart Ted had ever seen. It had a real steering wheel instead of a rope for steering. It had 2 pedals that Ted could use to brake when he reached the bottom of the hill. It had a pointed nose for aerodynamic speed. Grandpa had even painted silver flames along each side of the cart. It was spectacular. Finally, it was finished. Ted and his grandpa stood in the garage, admiring the go-kart. It's beautiful, Grandpa. It's the most amazing go-kart I've ever seen. The other kids will be so jealous. Ted almost forgot his fear because he was so excited. Then it came back and his smile faded. You know, nobody is going to force you to race, Ted, his grandpa said quietly. Your mom and dad would understand if you didn't want to after the accident. No, they wouldn't, said Ted. Ever since I got the plaster cast off, it's all they talk about. They can't wait for me to race again. They just want you to be happy, and you used to love racing so much, said his grandpa. They want you to be doing what you love, but if you tell them how you feel, they will understand. I can't tell them. Anyway, we've built this amazing go-kart now. I have to race it. You don't have to do anything you don't want to, his grandpa said. I've enjoyed working on this go-kart with you. I love spending time with you. It doesn't matter if it never gets used. Ted looked at the go-kart. It was an amazing go-kart. He was very proud to have helped build something so beautiful. He wanted to know if it was as fast as it looked. He really wanted to know. It matters to me, he said to his grandpa. I'll race it next weekend if you'll be my pusher. You bet I will, said Grandpa. I want to see how this great machine runs too. He and Ted looked proudly at their go-kart. Of course, next Saturday is the last race of the season. That means it's the highest hill race. Are you sure you don't want to wait until spring to race? His grandpa asked. Ted nodded. The highest hill was where he had crashed his go-kart. It was the steepest hill near the village, and parents only let the kids race there a few times a year when there was a lot of adult supervision. It was quite dangerous. I'm sure, he said. If I wait for spring, I'll never race again. The day of the race was sunny, but cold. It was almost winter, and the kids would trade their go-karts for sleds when the snow came. The whole village had come out to the highest hill to see the last race of the year and to see Ted's new go-kart. Ted stood with his grandpa near the starting line. The little red go-kart was sparkling in the sunshine beside them. Everyone came to admire it and to ask Ted how his arm was and whether he was ready to race again. Ted could feel his stomach twisting into knots of nerves. He wasn't sure if he was ready at all. His grandpa patted him on the back reassuringly. Remember to try it and enjoy it, he said. This is about finding out if you still want to race. Winning isn't important. You're out of practice, so you can't expect to win. Ted laughed nervously. That's nice of you, Grandpa, but you know as well as I do that this cart deserves to win. We've put a lot of work into it, and we want it to do well. Ha! His grandpa laughed. You're right, of course. Don't you worry about the go-kart, though. It's going to fly down this hill. You just concentrate on steering it. The race starter told everyone to get into their go-karts. All Ted's friends wished him luck, and he could see his family standing far away at the bottom of the hill. His heart was racing as he climbed into the little red go-kart and put his safety helmet on. He patted the go-kart's hood for good luck. Grandpa had hold of the back of the cart and pushed him to the starting line. Ted could see all the way down the steep hill. It seemed like a very long way. Ted was so afraid that he wanted to climb out of the cart, but he heard Grandpa behind him saying, "You can do it, Ted." He took a deep breath and waited for the starter to drop the flag. Suddenly, the flag dropped. Grandpa was running behind the cart, pushing it with all his strength. Then Ted felt Grandpa let go, and the little red cart was gaining speed down the hill. It was so fast. Ted felt the wind rushing by his face. Everything was a blur. He could hear cheering from the crowd lining the track, and he could see the other carts as he went speeding past them. One by one, his little red cart passed all the other carts. Now Ted's heart was racing with excitement instead of fear. He gave a loud shout of joy as he passed the last cart in front of him. He was winning. Ted crossed the finish line first. He pressed on both brake pedals and felt the little red go-kart slow and finally stop. He'd forgotten what it felt like to race down the hill, to feel the excitement of it. He wasn't afraid anymore. In fact, he wanted to go back to the top and do it all again. Grandpa came rushing over and gave Ted a hug. "You did it! You won! Congratulations! We won," said Ted with a huge grin. "I couldn't have done it without you, Grandpa. Thanks." "It's a fine go-kart, isn't it?" Grandpa said proudly. "It sure is. You were right, Grandpa. It really flew. I can't wait for next season." "Why wait? Maybe we should build a sled for the winter races." Ted laughed. "I think that's a great idea," he said.